Okay, welcome to the new student pharmacist podcast experience. It's so good to have you listening in today. I'm going to be co-hosting the show with my buddy Chadwin Hanna, an MD PhD student at UF. He'll chime in soon, and our guest today is Dr. Nassir Mokarram. We got connected through one of the former professors I had at Georgia Tech, Dr. Bioengineering. But more about Nassir. Nassir is currently an associate professor at Emory University in the Department of Neurosurgery. He serves in different roles as assistant research professor at Duke. He has also served as a biodesign innovation fellow at Stanford and as a fellow with Life Science Angels. Nassir is definitely an accomplished early career academic, and it's definitely a treat and an honor to have him on this podcast today. So, this is a New Student Pharmacist podcast. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a variety of other platforms. Here on this podcast, we discuss pharmacy ideas, research, chemistry, successful student stories, and successful academic stories and their impact on society. We're so glad you're tuning in today. Nassir is a distinguished bioengineer and polymer scientist, and this episode will be co-hosted by Chadwin Han. So, as we get started, Chadwin, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast and inviting me to be a guest speaker. Neurosurgery is near and dear to my heart, so I'm very excited to have this conversation with Nassir today, really delve into some of his thoughts behind our science.
Definitely. So, Nassir, what inspired you to pursue a career in bioengineering and polymer science, and how did your training at Georgia Tech shape your current research focus?
Awesome. Uh, Absolutely. Thank you, David, and thank you, Chadwin, for joining. Very excited about the conversation. What inspired me to become a bioengineer was actually a dilemma that I had in high school. I didn't know if I want to go to medicine or if I want to do engineering. So somebody told me when I was in high school, biomedical engineering was still a new field. Somebody, a friend, a family friend who was at Johns Hopkins back then, gave a call to him and I said, I don't know what to do. And he said, look, there's this field, biomedical engineering or bioengineering. It's the best of the both worlds. And maybe that would be the place for you to go. And I don't know if you know, Georgia Tech has been top 3 for the last 20 years. Recently, it's been number 1 for the last maybe year or two. It was a competition between Johns Hopkins and Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech, it's finally number 1. Very well deserved, in my opinion. And so it was my luck and honor to be at Georgia Tech number 1 biomedical engineering department and really shape the future of my career when I started at Georgia Tech in a way that the name is so recognized and the diversity of work at Tech on the biomedical engineering front is so diverse that I was just tapping into that for my professional career, and it really opened the door later on for me.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So, you talk about your time at Georgia Tech. When you were choosing a PI, what was the process that you chose? Because you worked with Dr. Bellamconda, correct? Or Provost Bellamconda.
I
Yeah.
did, and it's one of the best decisions I made in my life. Um, it was interesting because I was lucky to get a fellowship. I was in material science department, and they gave me a fellowship. And the difference was, I was not obligated to choose my PI before starting my PhD. In some programs, the fund comes directly from PI, and therefore you need to have some sort of agreement with the PI. In this case, the fund was coming from the department, and they gave me an opportunity to go actually interview PIs to choose who I want to work with. And I remember I made this Excel sheets with different criterias that I had in mind, and I talked to like maybe 30 people. We just go knock on the door, talk to them, and then I have my own top finalists. And Provost Bellamconda now at Emory was one of the top 3, and there were 2 other amazing people, and they were both also amazing. I could have not make a wrong decision, to be honest with you. But I went through a process of, talking to graduate students. So I think this might be good for your graduate student applicants, that it's really important more than the research area that you're going to focus on. It's really important to think about who you are going to work with. So I would say it's not even the PI, it's your lab mates. You need to go and see if you have the luxury of having conversation with people in the lab. Let's just go have a conversation with them, because you know what, you're going to be one of those people in few months or a year. You would look like them, you would feel like, I mean, not appearance wise, but you can tell, some labs are happy places and people are just happy there. Some labs are, you know there's more pressure, and you can see that in not that one is better or the other. I mean, obviously happy, everyone wants to be happy, but in the labs that have pressure, you can produce more and you have papers. So you can just really go spend time in labs that you want to be part of and see what's a culture and what's an environment, and really decide based on that. I think that's number one factor. So I had the luxury of going to all those three labs. I had the luxury of talking to those PIs. The thing is, ultimately, your research area can evolve and change, especially during PhD. It's science. Things might not work and you need to pivot. It's important to have a supportive environment that believes in you and provide you with the infrastructure for you to thrive. And that was how I made my decision, basically.
That's
Chadwin, you go
awesome.
ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce back to that first question that David asks. I really connect with being someone with an engineering mind, but wanting to go into medicine. And when it was time to go into undergrad, I'm like, what do I do? Where do I go? And finding the field of biomedical engineering was like a dream for me, because it was the mix of the best of both worlds. So what type of advice would you give to high school students or even students with a bachelor's degree, for example, in engineering, that still want to go into medicine, but they don't know if they can make that jump?
Make the jump
to medicine from like a really heavy engineering or math background?
Yeah. I think it's actually a good thing to go from engineering to medicine. Um, I mean, depends on your personal and life and professional career goals, I guess, at the end of the day. But engineering gives you a certain way of thinking about things that can become very critical, especially for perhaps surgery. And yes, in one sense, you want to gather all the information before making decision, and maybe surgeons don't have the luxury of doing that. So maybe that's not a greatest characteristic of an engineer, but attention to details, being calculative, being analytical, is another feature that a great surgeon. I'm giving surgery as an example because you can relate in this realm. I think the good thing about the United States higher education system is that you don't need to choose going to medicine right after high school. In most countries, you need to make that decision during high school time, and you just don't have enough information to make that decision. By the time you're in your undergrad, I think it would be good to explore. And you might do biochemistry, you might do engineering, like a biomedical engineering, and this is a good time for you to assess if that's something that you want to continue for the rest of your life, or if you have passion for medicine, then you can make a jump to medicine. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, to be honest with you, but if I'm not, paraphrase it for me, please.
No, I think that was great. I wanted you to chime in on some of those points of like, engineers can make good physicians too. I know I've had conversations with folks in undergrad who are focusing in engineering majors that don't really think that their skills can mesh with a medical degree. But what you just said was spot on. So thank you.
Of course.
Anything else, Chadwin?
Go ahead, David.
Okay, sure. So, balancing academic responsibilities and personal well-being. How do you balance the demanding responsibilities of being a research faculty member and now an associate professor of neurosurgery with other aspects of your life to ensure that you have some form of a holistic perspective on your career and personal well-being? So basically, how do you keep your work life integrated?
That's the million dollar question, right? It's funny because when I was at Stanford, we were lucky enough to be exposed to this very, high-ranked CEOs of Fortune 100, Fortune 500 medical device pharmaceutical company, and that was the only question I had for them. Like, you being on top of the food chain, how you're making a work-life balance? Do you meditate? Do you like have some, like, you read book, or you do some sport? Like, it's a good question, and I think I cannot claim that I figured that out fully. I am. This might sound controversial. I'm not big fan of work hard, play hard thesis. I think that's. I don't know. I think it's not. It's I like the middle ground approach. I like, to work and to play in harmony. And I think that's more sustainable than just work, 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 and then all the way out on the weekend, and then, whatever. But depending on your age, God knows what happens. And then you come back and start working. It's a definitely a mindset that I see a lot of people are advocating for. It's not for me, and I think maybe I'm more of a Jeff Bezos, even though he's a workaholic, I guess. Uh, Definition of harmony more than balance. So if you choose your career, and this goes back to maybe more fundamental philosophical question you need to ask, to choose a career or to choose a profession that does not exhaust you so much that for you require to play that hard to basically recover, right? So, it's an indication. If you really need to check your time, it's like it's 5 p.m. I need to go home. Maybe that's not the best career, because if you love what you do, and I'm really blessed and fortunate to, I love what I do. I think this is the best thing I can do in my life. And it's all work and it's all play. Because you have all sort of, creativity and things that you would do in leisure time for your work too. So maybe I'm evading your question to some extent, but it's really the harmony that you need to figure out for you, and it's a personal thing. I do travel when I feel I'm burnt out. I love art. I go submerge myself in a totally different artistic environment that gives me inspiration and basically reset and recover me. I just came back from a short trip, visited my sister in Europe, but recovering, right? Like, you see things that I don't normally see, and that's good for me to reset. So traveling, and a good book, a sci-fi book, not a self-development, which usually I think maybe the audience of the podcast or podcaster people are like all about self-development, including myself. But a good sci-fi book that just transform you to a different universe would be a good recovery. And that's what you usually do: travel and books.
That's awesome. I think that's like the best explanation of you have to love what you do that I've heard in a very long time. You work while you play. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. You have to have an integration that works for you, and you can adapt for your own personal well-being. Completely agree. Completely agree. There's no one cookie cutter model for work life. And some people even make the point that they don't believe that there's such a thing as work-life balance. I wouldn't phrase it like that. I think it depends on your operational definition of balance, because balance is respective to the person who's doing the balancing. So yeah. But yeah, what innovative approaches do you employ in your current research on modulating immune response, or for tissue repair or cancer therapy? Just to be more specific, in terms of your research focus as a professor at Emory, what would you say is something that's very innovative or novel you bring to the table, or that you're trying to bring to the table?
Sure. So there are a few things that I've been lucky enough to be involved with. I'm generally speaking interested in nervous system, peripheral nervous system, your nerves in your fingers and legs, and the central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. They both have some challenges, they have some diseases, and it's an area that it's more, less touched. Like if I talk about cardiovascular diseases or a significantly more innovation, but brain, we don't understand, nervous system is complicated. So for my PhD, I chose perhaps the two most complicated areas of the body, and they're, if you have a Venn diagram, where's their interactions? One is nervous system, one is immune response. So, or immune system and nervous system, and how they can help each other, how immune system can basically help nerve regeneration and nerve repair, and things like that. So that was my PhD. And I'll answer your question in two parts. What we did innovative during my graduate school, which is something that I would love to go back and continue at some point, was that we figured out a way to use immune response, which is normally is to fight diseases and foreign objects. It's not, that's our general understanding of what immune response, like it's immune to just protect. We found a way to modulate immune response to enhance nerve regeneration. So imagine you have a spinal cord injury or peripheral nerve injury. The nerves don't grow as much as your skin or your muscle. We figured out that the specific kind of immune cells that are called macrophages, part of your innate immune response, they are the, if you will, a conductor of orchestra symphony that's called healing. So if you can change them how to do this, then they can basically decide what needs to be done or help what needs to be done for better regeneration versus scarring. That was the innovative approach. We got news attention, published some good papers, has been highly cited, and that was what I was mainly focused during my graduate school. When post-graduation and after some of the training that I did in West Coast, I was fascinated by another topic that's the nervous system related, but it's not about regeneration. It's a major disease that's called glioblastoma. It's the most invasive form of brain tumors. Some people call it our generation moon landing, if we can find a cure for this disease. It's I found a quote from 1928, I think, or 26, from this neurosurgeon that described this disease with a median survival time of 12 months. Almost 100 years later, the median survival time for these patients is about 15 months. During the last, that 3 months happened during the last 50 years, and we haven't had anything major, even though there was a device approved and some drugs. Nobody has been able to move the needle. And there are multiple reasons for why it has not been successful, and we can talk about why this is a challenging disease. But we started developing, in my opinion, a paradigm shifting approach in treating glioblastoma, again, most invasive malignant form of brain tumors. And the paradigm shifting idea was, instead of killing or blocking the invasion of this heterogeneous smart disease, can we guide its migration? Meaning that we make a fatal, deadly disease a chronic one. Can we make it like a diabetes? Like, instead of 15 months, you live 5 years or 10 years, you have the disease. We are not claiming to cure it. It's smart, it evolves, it changes its nature. But we can guide its migration so it doesn't invade to the areas that are sensitive or places that can be fatal. And that's generally what our lab is focused on at Emory. figuring out how we can move cancer cells from point A to point B. And we are mainly focused on brain tumors, but the technologies that we are developing can be applicable to most of the other hard to treat heterogeneous diseases. So not that many people are focused on moving cells. Most people are focused on killing or expanding cells or differentiating stem cells. Moving cells, that's taxes from point A to point B, is something that we are interested in. And if you think about it, a lot of diseases or a lot of the processes in the body require cells to go from point A to point B in a very refined, cohesive way. And we are utilizing bioengineering tools inspired by nature to move cells from point A to point B using electrical field, using physical cues, using chemical cues. It's called chemotaxis to do that, and that's basically the general thesis of the lab.
Okay, so I have a question. So do you use like angiogenesis inhibitors or regulators, or are you affecting contact inhibition in the process of you doing your work? Because it sounds like you're targeting some of the hallmarks of cancer in terms of how it functions by changing the dynamic, the pathophysiological state or status from it being a short disease that's fatal to a long chronic disease in terms of the mind. So, what specifically are you targeting within those like hallmarks or factors or aspects of the cancer? Are you targeting angiogenesis, contact inhibition, metastasis?
That's a good question, and it's one way to think about it in the context of hallmarks of cancer. And I never thought about it that way, to be honest with you. I think, or I can explain what we are doing, and then we can come back how it's related to hallmark. For example, and this is a technology we developed in the lab, and now it's licensed out to a private entity that's starting a clinical trial on it. One way for glioblastoma uh, cells to migrate is to use aligned neural tracks. If you think about it, we have all of these neurons on one hemisphere and all the other neurons on the other hemisphere, and they go through a tight bridge that's called corpus callosum. So if you look at corpus callosum under a microscope, you make a cross section, you see all of these neural tracks aligned because they're going through this tight bridge. It's a traffic going through a tight bridge that go through corpus callosum. GBM, evolutionary wise, somehow figured out if it follows those aligned structure, it can find a way to go to the other hemisphere. Now, what we are doing is we mimic those structures using nanofibers that has similar kind of dimension and alignment. We put it in the vicinity of the tumor, and we basically lure tumor by its own volition to come inside our device because it thinks it's corpus callosum. It has an affinity to those aligned structure. We provide a path of least resistance for migration of tumor. So instead of surgeon going to the deep tumor crawls inside our device and come to the surface, and surgeon can scoop it out. So even in the context of hallmarks, there are a bunch of things we are doing that it's aligned with hallmarks of cancer. But if I want to choose one, it's using whatever metastasis way. There is a method to the madness of tumor migration. If you figure out what they use, you can get inspiration, a biomimetic inspiration from them, make a bio-inspired device, and use your device to artificially guide them and provide a path of least resistance to the destination that you like. And that's what we're doing.
Okay, that sounds good. One more question that's somewhat technical, and then we can continue in terms of just discussing your career. In terms of like affecting the migration, this is just a hypothetical question. What do you think, or how do you think using differentiation factors that come from like gastrulation, the gastrulation phase of the development of certain aspects of the body, like the brain, how do you think differentiation factors for like certain types of cells during the gastrulation phase will affect uh, the migration that the cells are working on. Because differentiation factors have an effect on how the cell develops, where it ends up, when a organism is going through gastrulation, whether it be the neurogenesis or development of skin, limbs, all those types of things. How do you think, or do you think it could affect the work that you're doing? Those differentiation factors that occur during like embryonic development. Do you think that would play a role or contribute, or are you just not sure?
That's an interesting question, David. I've never thought about that actually.
Okay,
And
so some food for
no,
thought.
yeah. No, it's interesting. I never thought about that. We definitely get cues from um, evolution and
Mm.
evolution biology, but this is a very particular aspects that I prefer to say I don't know instead of make you
Okay,
some
that's
sort of
fair.
info. But yeah, but good question.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, Chadwin.
Yeah, I really appreciated that research synopsis and your explanation of how disease pathophysiology and understanding that, understanding how the tumor works is really guiding your design and trying to figure out solutions for, like you said, not curing, but turning it into a chronic disease that doesn't just outrightly kill um, patients that are affected by it.
That's
I think that research vision is really cool, and the approach that you have taken is paradigm shifting, right? Because if you look at anyone or speak to them about healing cancer, it's how do we remove the tumor, how do we kill the tumor, um, but changing the way that the tumor, quote unquote, thinks is extremely interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah,
With
I
that
agree.
in mind, go ahead, David.
You go ahead, Chadwin.
Yeah, with that in mind, I just wanted to know how you kind of gather a team behind your vision, right? And move forward with some of the research tenets that you've set forth for future development. Like how do you get everyone on the same page and make sure that you're moving forward in a way that you think is still true to the way that you want to do research and the vision that you have for the science that you're working on?
That's another excellent question, and again, $1 million question. Building a team is something that I am, every day. It's something that I think about it and I try to educate myself. And I'm thinking out loud here, so just sharing some thoughts. Obviously, I think you need to be authentic. I think people, if if there is a game, if there's something that you actually don't believe in it, people will see through it and they won't buy it. So you need to be authentic and you need to really preach what you believe in it. And I think that's my number one rule. Number two, you need to understand what are people individual motivations and attributes, and you genuinely need to figure out if this is a good fit for them or not. As a leader, you need to care about people who are in your team, and you need to think about their career, their life, and their growth too. It's not just about the project, it's about these people. And if you prioritize their well-being, and not just well-being but their trajectory and their growth, and be their advocate. And in order to do that, you need to sit down and figure out who is this person, what do they want in their life, and there is no right or wrong answer. And then be creative enough to be able to connect the dots between what are their positive attributes and what they're looking for, and what this project or this technology or this company or this research opportunity can bring in. And then in their mind, connect those dots. Tell them, you want to be this, and these projects, this is how this project or this technology or this company or this effort can help you to achieve that personal goal. I think that's an art of a good leader, but it requires a lot of empathy and caring and curiosity.
Yeah, that's awesome. Definitely an art to the science, right?
That's right.
Great.
Definitely. So that sounds good, but in line with like teamwork and personal philosophy and vision, um, can you share a personal model of philosophy that drives your pursuit of excellence and innovation in bioengineering? Is there like a go-to maxim, like never give up, like Churchill would say? Is there like a maxim or some type of motivational quote that you say to yourself on those like interesting research days or challenging days? Even from grad school, what maxim or thought or even story can you share with the audience that really stands out to you?
What keeps
That's
you
something.
going?
Yeah, what keeps you going? Very good. Very good.
So it's interesting. Um, I like this question, and I think this answer that I'm giving you, I've never said this anywhere, and I'm just again thinking out loud. And I like this to be organic and thinking about things that I'm thinking, not a cookie cutter answer. And I think that's actually that's a key word. I I so I'll give you just a 30-second backstory. When I was younger, my parents were wanted me to, like any good parents, they wanted me to learn an art, and they sent me to piano class when I was 6 years old. And I was trying to learn how to play piano for 6 7 years and I did not have a talent in it. And I don't know how disappointed my parents were, but I was always thinking, I don't know how to create. I'm not a good artist. And by the general definition of what arts are, painting, music, cinema, and things like that. And I thought, and then later on in my life, I thought, well, if I don't have I don't have the general ways of expressing myself in the creative arts, what other avenues that I have to be able to create and be original? And I think if I want to tell you what's my motto is being original, and which the synonym for that in this context would be disruptive. So you need to, and that's why I said cookie cutter is a good opposite keyword, because anything I like to do, and that's why I chose, this kind of field that's, biomedical engineering, and, engineering and medicine is kind of unique. Then you think about it in the context of biomedical engineering, nervous system is less touched. Then in that realm, GBM is something that nobody has been able to figure it out. So challenging problems that requires a lot of creativity and disruption, because I really think that's the, not to get too philosophical, but that's a God part of us, right? To be able to, that's a manifestation of, being a creative and create something from scratch that does not exist. So that's really my philosophy in my professional life, at least, that to be able to do things that are the places that are less touched and there is a need, and let's go be able to see if we can disrupt. And it's not as simple a slogan, but hopefully I was able to convey the context.
Yes, that was very good. That's very good.
Yeah.
Just one. Go ahead, Chadwin. You gonna say something?
No, I was gonna say yeah, for sure. Context conveyed.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm curious. I've seen a bit of stuff. Just dropping back into your research, and then we'll continue, and then we'll wrap up for a bit. Just dropping back into your research. What role do you think? I don't know. You may know. Um, what role do you think CAR T cells can play in your work? And if there is a way, do you think that same approach could be used for glial cells to contribute to the work that you're doing? Because I know glials and astrocytes, they play a role in the upkeep, if you will, of the nervous system. So, what role do you think cellular engineering has to play in the work that you do?
That's right. No, absolutely. I mean, CAR T cells been disruptive and evolutionary and revolutionary, and they were able to treat some diseases now. Like some of the blood cancers have 100% cure opportunity now because of the CAR T cells. And these are the smartest immune cells in your body, right? Like they adopt and they feel and find out the foreign objects and they attack them. And training them in the right way to figure out what's a foreign object can be very impactful. The issue with brain is there are four areas of your body, one being brain, that's called immunoprivileged. And the kind of immune response that you have in the brain is different from the rest of your body. The representation of both innate and adaptive immune cells, and our understanding of immune cells in brain is continuously been evolving. I would say even during the last 10, 15 years, there have been some major breakthrough that is like really changing the story in the context of what kind of immune cells exist in the brain. But if I want to answer your question, that's the main issue. With immunotherapy, especially cell therapy in the brain, you need to be able to recruit those immune cells to the brain and be able to or maybe inject them to the brain to present them, because it's like a desert. There's nothing there from immune response. Not nothing there, but significantly less number of immune cells there. So CAR T cell can be effective eventually if it can be administered right, but there are some challenges, including blood-brain barrier, including again the whole immune privilege situation with the brain. But Duke University, which is another place that I had a opportunity to have affiliation with, is the mecca of this kind of work. And there was a polio vaccine or poliovirus study that was a study at Duke and has been very successful, featured in 60 Minutes actually twice. And we are lucky to collaborate with that team with some of our technologies that have been working on generally in the theme of immunomodulation and immunoengineering to attack cancer cells. And they have, all sort of studies, including CAR T cells. And we'll see what happens. But if you can figure out the challenges, then there should be a promise there.
Sounds good. So as we start to wrap up, I'll ask questions and Chad, go ahead. What advice do you have for aspiring bioengineers, polymer scientists, especially those from diverse backgrounds? What advice would you offer to them as they navigate their own path as early as high school to success? So you talked about creating, you talk about finding something that you could work on that's viable, you talk about work and play being integrated. What advice would you give them? Someone who sees the work that you're doing and says simply, I want to do what Dr. Mokarram is doing. But seriously, what advice would you give?
I think the most important advice that I would give to younger people would be to this is my life hack. I'll try to put myself in a situation that people around me, again, it sounds maybe cliche, but I'll get a little bit into it. People around me are significantly smarter than me. If you be in an environment that you are the most intellectual and the smartest person in the room, you're not going to gain that much. So number one, I would say push yourself to put yourself in an environment that would elevate you. That means going to good schools, for example. So your peers, your advisors are from certain caliber. That's been my life hack. I always push to go to places that I probably don't even deserve to be there, but by pushing and trying, then I can elevate myself. That's the easiest thing to do. And the other thing is, this is advice that I got from one of my friends at Johns Hopkins that I think was a very good advice. That until very recently, people needed to be T in their life, meaning a lot of superficial knowledge about a lot of areas, but deep understanding of one area, like a letter T. I think we are getting closer to a situation that you need to be a pie, meaning that superficial knowledge of a lot of things, but at least two areas that you can be deep. Why? Because then you can connect things that are necessarily not relevant to each other, but if you connect them, it can be creative and innovative. Which translates, if I want to give an advice, to be curious and don't, as much as you want to stay focused, but have a hobby, have something else going on that can eventually help you with that major first effort. Like if you understand, if just have two seemingly different areas to be expert at, and that, I think that would give you a unique opportunity to be a person to connect these areas, especially thinking about AI. What we AI is really good. If you give one field, AI can just be better than you in that field. But what AI can't yet, and it will happen eventually, but it still cannot do, is to connect two completely separate areas to each other, right? Like get inspiration, look at the trees and look at the branches and look at the root and think about the political structure. Like what well, it's not relevant, right? But we can do that. And keeping it with the theme of creation, I think that's the essence for being innovative and creative. And then the first suggestion, as I said, is to put yourself in an environment that elevates you.
Go ahead, Chadwin.
Awesome. Thank you. I have like a two-part question as we close out. Thank you so much for explaining your research again, and you've been extremely successful in your field. I just want to know, as you move forward, do you have strategies put in place to ensure that your research and your science remains relevant? That's number one. And number two, as you go through that process, do you think about what type of legacy or impact you hope to leave on the field of bioengineering and on the world in general?
Oh, wonderful questions. These are like, I need to do inner journey answering these questions. But no, wonderful questions. I think to think about, how can we continue this? I think if it's valuable, people will continue it. So I'm not really too worried about that. I think as long as you do your best to do a good PR and publish and educate people about your approach and try, and if people like it, they will like anything else. It's, they're free to choose and they can continue doing it. And if it's not working out, then don't worry about it. Don't waste your time. So I'm not too concerned about that. And I can come back to question number one if I'm not answering your question. But number two, maybe it's a similar theme. I mean, legacy is interesting. I go back to what was my childhood dream. My childhood dream was to be able to positively affect millions of people's lives in the healthcare context mainly. Is it either it's a disease or a mental health or a physical health? So if I can do that, I'll be happy. If I can figure out how to increase the life expectancy of glioblastoma patients by a few months, few years, I would be happy. Because that's maybe that's a a profound goal, or maybe it's naive, maybe it's not, or maybe it's easy. I don't know. It's just something that I desire, and I like to accomplish that. So that's really what I think in terms of legacy, to fulfill my childhood dream.
That's as wholehearted as it can be. So I really appreciate that, and I think you answered the question on staying relevant very well as well. Like, if it's important to people, it will be, and it sticks with the theme of you staying true to yourself, down to your childhood passion, which I really appreciate.
Thank you.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. So thank you, Nassir. Thank you, Chadwin, for joining me today. I highly appreciate it. This was definitely a good episode. Please note the views reflect those of my guests and I. So thanks again for listening.
Thank you, Chadwin.